a pleasure and honor to be here on Lopez, first time for me. So, beautiful facility here. Thank you so much. What I want to do is try to bring together two facets of my life. One, and you so nicely laid them out. One is I study and teach about American politics and the ways in which people run for office and the messages they put forward and the strategies that are involved. So that's kind of what the electoral politics vein of my work. And I've been doing that work since I entered graduate school in the early 1990s. The second body of my work is around race and racial identity in the United States. Really centrally how it is that our racial perceptions, our racial histories are interwoven into the American story, the American identity. These two pieces obviously intersect in a significant way and really intersect in this election. And I have been doing presidential election lectures in Seattle for the last couple elections. In 2008 I started them and did 15 lectures, public lectures. Did 15 more in 2012. And their following has kind of grown up around these lectures, and I wasn't planning to do any around this election because I have other things on my plate. I'm really invested in an initiative that I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight. Until I realized that this election was shaping up to be one that was really about the soul of this country, particularly around the kind of changing racial identity of America. Okay? And once that became apparent to me, I just knew that I needed to do the things that I could do, which would do a series of lectures around the election and to talk about how the changing racial composition in the United States was impacting this election and where we're going. So I want to bring those two together, election lectures along with these kind of racial identity pieces. And I've been studying race and racial identity in the United States for some time. I've been studying since the early 1990s. And for most of that period of time, because I operate with the privileges of whiteness in the United States, it's been a largely intellectual exercise for me. It's been a circumstance in which I get, as a tenured professor at a major research university, and also with the kind of objective safety of a white man, I'm able to study these pieces and to think about them, and to spend a lot of time thinking about them. But I've come to realize over the last several years that that's not sufficient. It's not remotely sufficient, that our country demands much more than that the world needs much more than that, and that we have to feel it in our heart in a different way. And that feeling in our heart requires not only an intellectual understanding, but it requires a personal connection to the issue. And so for the last 3 years, we've been doing work around civil rights pilgrimages, leading them from Seattle area to the U.S. South. Started out as 6-day trips, and are now 9-day, 10-day trips, 10-day, 9-night trips. We go to Nashville, we go to Montgomery, to Birmingham, to Tuscaloosa, to the Mississippi Delta, to Jackson, Mississippi, to Oxford, Mississippi, to Philadelphia, Mississippi, and then end in Selma. And it's an incredible interracial, intergenerational, multi-gender, multi-sexual, economically varied, multinational experience. These sets of characteristics are things that we don't spend our days in. We spend our days very often in silos, in racial silos, in economic silos, some often in sexual silos, national silos for sure. And so we bring together groups that are intentionally diverse. Intentionality is the key here. And we engage in a series of conversations where we talk about the state of this country, the state of the world, and we really tell our personal stories. In that telling of those personal stories, and that listening to each other is when the heart begins to change and you begin to see that we're all in this together in a way that is not an abstract thing, but actually this is my brother, this is my sister, they're with us. And so Kim and I got to know each other through one of these experiences, and when she asked me to come up here, it was nothing but a question. Of course I'd come and spend a little bit of time with you. It was an honor to be asked because this work is so vital, it's so important. And I come to you tonight to suggest that the election that we're facing, this presidential election, really is fundamentally a moment of choosing for this country. Ronald Reagan gave a famous speech in 1964 called A Time for Choosing, and that was when he was making the case for Barry Goldwater. And for conservatives, that was a moment of choosing. I think for progressives very much right now, it's a moment of choosing. How serious are we going to take Donald Trump and Ted Cruz? Are we going to laugh at them and mock them? Or are we going to recognize that if one of them becomes a nominee, which is almost certain, that they're only one scandal on the Democratic side away from becoming president? or they're one health challenge on the Democratic side away from becoming president, or they're one set of significant apathy on the Democratic side away from becoming president. And so this is really a moment of choosing in which progressives have to look at themselves and say, especially white progressives, and look at ourselves and say that this country is fundamentally at a crossroads, and are we going to treat it as a carnival show and laugh, or which is what whites get to do? Or are we going to treat it as a space in which, if you're not white and not Christian in this country, you are fundamentally under threat right now? Okay? So I want to talk a little bit about that. So American Transformation 2016 and the Presidency. I want to start here with a prologue that kind of, like in a book, is relevant, and then it's something that occurs and it has relevance as we go forward. And I want to quote from Leslie Morris, who occupies a new position for the New York Times, a position they created just late 2015 called Critic at Large. And I felt that coming to Lopez, the only appropriate place to start my talk was with the New York Times. Okay? And so the New York Times Critic at Large, Morris, wrote a great piece that appeared in the first Sunday issue of the Times, first Sunday issue of 2016 for the Times, in which he wrote a review, a kind of reflecting back in 2015, and the headline for the piece was "The Year of Obsessing Over Identity." Okay? And he writes about these different kind of currents that are going on in this country, and I just want to quote one paragraph from him, in which he says, "Barack Obama's election was the dynamite that broke open the country. It was a moment. It was the moment. Obama was biological proof of some kind of progress, the product of an interracial relationship, the kind that was outlawed in some states as recently as 1967, but was normalized over time. What if suddenly anything was possible? What if we could be and do whatever and whoever we wanted? In that moment, the country was changing. We were changing. Obama was black. He was white. He was hope. He was apocalypse. And he brought a lot of anxiety into weird relief. We had never really had a white president until we had a black one. The recognition that, and this is the way whiteness works, we don't recognize whiteness until it's not present. And Obama has brought that into relief for millions of people in the world, and certainly millions in the United States. And for many people, it is not an abstract exercise. It is not an interesting thing. It is not a curiosity. It is a very real, scare the hell out of them, or the best thing they've ever seen. Reality. Okay? So I want to talk, segue from that prologue then to national identity. National identity is this big kind of scholarly term that refers to the ways in which we think about the nation states that we live. How do we think about these places? And I want to set up the idea that that what we have to do is imagine America. It's too big for us to do anything more than imagine this as a country. You can travel all you want, but the reality is you're not going to meet everybody. You're not going to see every place in this nation. And so all we can really do is imagine the country. Benedict Anderson is a famous researcher who in 1983 wrote a book called Imagine Communities, in which he made the argument that modern nation states are so large that they function really as imagined communities, that we shrink them mentally in order to imagine them. And that in that imagination, because we try to understand what this place is like, these imagined communities that are nation states take on profound emotional meaning. They begin to mean things to us that really don't make any sense. There's no real rational reason why it is that I should care more about an American than a Kenyan. There's no rational reason that's the case. There's no rational reason that I should care more when Americans compete in the Olympics than when Canadians compete in the Olympics. But yet, these things occur. Why is it when I see a flag of the United States, I feel a certain way when I notice flags are at half-mast on government property? I'm assuming that's Nancy Reagan. Is it Nancy Reagan? But I started to think about, like, why was that? Why is it at half-mast? Because there's some kind of meaning behind it. So for some reason, the nation state takes on this emotional meaning. It doesn't happen just by chance. It happens because over time, we get invested in the nation's standing, and our investment in what the nation is becomes core to our sense of self. It happens over time as we're raised within a society. It happens for us personally, and it happens for us collectively. The reason it begins to happen is because of what scholars have called the practice of banal nationalism. That in a very kind of mundane way, we engage in nationalism every day. We do it by saying the Pledge of Allegiance when your kid's in schools. You do it by singing the national anthem before every major sporting event. There's no reason why we do that. There's no reason. It's not written into the Constitution. It's not written into any sacred scriptures. It is just a thing that has been created in our country that we stand up and do the national anthem before major sporting events. And if you don't stand up in that moment, you face a certain kind of peer pressure to do so. This became very apparent to me when I went to a comedy show with my sons. 14 and 8 years old. It's comedy sports. It's improv. And it's just goofy fun, and we like to go. And the first time we went in Seattle, they said, all right, now everybody rise for the national anthem. Like, this is a comedy show, all right? But they were making a play on the reality that before any sporting event, you do that. It's banal nationalism. We just do it in our country. All right? Sheldon Hackney was the head of the National Endowment for Humanities, and at the behest of President Clinton in the 1990s, he led a conversation on race, and he opened it up with a speech. And in that speech, he said, who are we? That is the question, and it's a crucial question. Who we think we are shapes what we do. As sure as it works in gendered terms or racial terms, it works in national terms. In the United States, our national identity is such a big deal that we have a name for it. We call it American exceptionalism. This idea that this is an exceptional country, never been better, never been trumped than others, okay? And so we have this idea, we have such a stake in it. And I'm not here to make fun of this idea because it has profound emotional meaning for people. The idea of American exceptionalism. People have fought and died for that idea, for that belief, all right? So whenever we begin to think about national identity, it's such a core thing to this country that we even have named it American exceptionalism. And just to give you a sense of how widespread this idea is, American exceptionalism, here's a Gallup poll data. Gallup, nonpartisan polling firm, asked the question most recently in 2010, because the United States' history and its constitution, do you think the U.S. has a unique character that makes it the greatest country in the world, or don't you think so? All right? It's a leading question, but nonetheless, it's an interesting question because we get a chance to see what percentage of people say, yeah, I do think so. And I'm going to show you the data, and I'm going to break it out by partisan identities, just to give you a sense, because of course, we know in the mythology of the United States that Republicans love this country while Democrats hate this country, right? That's the mythology of this place. So what percent across these three partisan identities say, yeah, I think this is the greatest country in the world? And these are the percentages saying yes over here. So, really across the three, whether you're Democratic, Republican, Independent, or Republican, the reality is that 75% or more say, this is the greatest country in the world. Republicans a little bit higher, but not in any kind of statistically meaningful way. The reality is that regardless of political persuasion, you do think this is the greatest country in the world, or at least you're willing to tell a pollster that you think it is. All right? So this is a widespread idea. It is a foundational idea in this country. And the reason this is important is because if you believe this is the greatest country in the world, when the country begins to change, there's a lot at stake. If we're just some small place on the globe that doesn't exert all this influence, isn't an economic behemoth, doesn't have 10 times larger than any other military firepower out there, then change isn't that profound of a thing. But if you are that elephant, that massive animal that you shake your tail and the world has to respond, then change that occurs to you becomes a deeply emotional thing for the people that live there and becomes incredibly important for those that are affected by that country. So change, especially core identity change, becomes a deeply profound thing that happens if you believe that this is the greatest country in the world. So with that kind of as the foundation then, that Americans think this, believe this, it's widespread, and any change to the country is going to force really collective thinking about this and perhaps a very strong response. Let's begin to think about the electorate and who we have as a society today. What does America look like when we think about politics? Well, I want to start with the population in the United States to look at trends over time according to U.S. Census data. census data is not perfect, but it's the best we've got in terms of mapping who lives in this country. And so across these racial groups, white, black, Latino, Asian, and other. Asian is now broke out, but these days, but back in the early 1900s, it was just lumped in with others. And so we're going to keep them as one kind of lumped together category. So we're going to track these groupings across time, and the percent there is the percent of the population that falls into these racial groups. So you can be white, black, Latino, Asian, or other. And we're going to track it over time across the last 100 years. So white, very much the largest across the top, and we have across the bottom, we have Asian and others starting to creep up. We have black kind of dipping a little bit and then slowly moving up because it is slowly increasing. And then Latino obviously starting to make a significant shift in the last 4+ decades. The percent of the population that is white, solely white, not Latino white, but solely white, is in the 60 percentages, is in the mid-60s right now. And so if you take all the people of color, which you can't do and you shouldn't do, but if you're a concerned white citizen, that's all they're doing is seeing increasingly non-white people around them, they begin to see these groups as one entity. And we're at about 33% non-white in this country, population-wise, as of 2010. So the trend is clear that less white, more people of color, and perhaps the greatest shift over time occurred because of the 1965 immigration law that was passed by Congress, signed by Lyndon Johnson, which began to change where people could come from to the United States, opening up immigration to largely non-European nations in a way that hadn't been opened before. And that really began to change the composition of this country. So the population clearly becoming less white over time. And for a room or a campus or a city that is overwhelmingly white, this may not feel like a big deal. But when you begin to operate in spaces where you begin to see this and interact with this space, it can be terrifying, especially if you believe this is the greatest country in the world and you're concerned about this influx. At the same time, folks that are down here are looking at this space and they're saying, I want a piece of that country. I want to be part of that country. I want to be accepted and treated as a full-fledged citizen. All right, so population over time is that, it looks like that. Well, when we get to presidential voters, it's not quite the same thing because not the same, we don't have the same percentage of registering to vote across those populations, across those different racial groups. So it's interesting and important for us to look at what the electorate looks like for a presidential campaign, since we're in the middle of a presidential campaign. So I can use exit poll data, and I can map really since the mid-1980s, because that's when the trend for whites really begins to kind of move down in a significant way. So picking up when that trend begins to move, and non-white begin to move up a little bit, from the late 1980s through 2016. We can look at those same racial groupings again. And now we're going to look at the percent that turns out to vote in these elections. So what's the relative racial composition of the presidential electorate across these presidential campaigns? And so over time, we can see this blue being the white population, so it's the dominant grouping, of course. Over time, we see a slowly declining body of white population and a slightly increasing black population, and then a more quickly increasing Latino population and an Asian or another population. So we get to 2008, and we get our first black president in 2008, or at least the first black president we know of in 2008. And in 2008, the percent of the population that is white that turned out to vote in that election was 76% white. 76% white, okay? So Obama wins election, does well, doesn't do near as well among whites, but does very well among non-whites, as I'll talk about in a few minutes. And so when we get to 2012, the Romney campaign looks at this trend and makes a bet, makes a gamble, in which they bet that the presidential turnout in 2012 is going to be no more white than it was in 2004. That's their bet. That was when Bush won re-election, and they think that because of the white backlash against Obama, that we're not going to be any more non-white in 2012 than we were in 2004. The Obama campaign says, look, there's a clear trend over here, and yes, you know, it might have jumped a little bit in 2008 because there was a black candidate, but the reality is this is a trend that's moving, and so they make a bet as well, and they say, we think that the electorate is going to continue to be more non-white. And so these are different strategies that campaigns base it upon, and we know that the Romney campaign, according to their polling data, they thought they were going to win. That's because according to their polling data, they were banking on an electorate that looked like this. The Obama campaign was banking on an electorate that looked like this, or even more non-white. So in 2012, what it was this. All right? This was 76% white, this is 72% white in 2012. So in 2012, we get even more non-white, and in 2016, we're expecting to get even more non-white. 70% white, 30% non-white. So over time, we're having an increasingly non-white, more diverse presidential electorate. This trend is clear demographically. This is going on. So the only two ways you beat this trend is if, one, you begin to appeal to non-whites, or two, you stop non-whites from voting. Okay? Those are the only two ways that you win. If you're a party, you either appeal to non-whites because they're growing as a part of the electorate, or you stop non-whites from voting. All right? Now, the one piece that I need to explain a little bit here is how presidential voters make, who they choose, and it's very important to point out, to examine whether or not white, black, Latino, and Asian voters tend to vote similarly in presidential elections. If they vote similarly in presidential elections, if white voters are no different than black voters in the aggregate, or no different than Latino voters, Latinos are no different than whites, then the reality is that it doesn't really matter that there's an increasingly diverse electorate. It doesn't matter because they all vote similarly. If, however, white voters are different from black, Latino, and Asian, or if these three clusters tend to be different than this, then the reality is that the increasingly non-white population is changing the likely outcomes of elections. If these groups vote differently than this group, then they become a threat politically to this group. If they vote similarly, then they're just more of the same. They're more of the same threat. So what I want to do is show you the 2004 data, the 2012 data. 2004, the last time a Republican won the presidency. 2012, the most recent time a Democrat won the presidency. And show you the kind of trends in the voting. And everything above the line is a Democratic advantage, and everything below the line is a Republican advantage. And what that means is, as it becomes clear when I show you the first set of numbers, that if the Democratic candidate won among white voters, then there would be a line going up this way that would show the percent by which they won among those voters. So if a Democratic candidate won 55 to 45 over the Republican candidate among white voters, there'd be a 10% gap here. 10% pro-Democratic gap. Conversely, if the Republican wins among white voters by 60-40, then there's a 20% gap that's pro-Republican this way. Okay? So let's see how Bush did in 2004 among each of these racial groups. This is Bush, what happened when George Bush won the election in 2004? Well, this is what happened when Bush won the election. Bush, among white voters, the winning candidate, Bush, wins white voters significantly in 2004. But he loses black voters because it's a Democratic advantage. It's red because Bush won, but it's a Democratic advantage. It's a Democratic advantage on Latinos, and it's a Democratic advantage on Asian Americans. So just to be really concrete, Bush lost black voters, this is a Democratic advantage, in 2004 by 83 points. 83 points. He lost Latino voters by 9 points, and he lost Asian American voters by 11 points. But he couldn't afford to lose that because he won white voters by a significant margin, and white voters were, in that election, 80% of the electorate. 80% of the electorate. So here comes Obama in 2012. Obama loses white voters again, just like Bush did. In fact, he loses them worse than Bush won them in 2004. So Obama wins, that's why it's in blue, but he loses among white voters. So it's a Republican advantage among white voters. Obama loses white voters 59-39. in 2012. It's the worst any Democratic candidate has ever done. Okay? 59-39 among white voters. But he wins black voters by 93%. And he wins Latino voters who the Kerry in 2004 had won by 9%. He wins it by 43 points. And in 2012, Barack Obama, Kerry had won Asian Americans by 11%. Barack Obama wins it by 47 points. So clearly, these three groups vote differently than this group. And the reality is these groups are getting bigger in the electorate. So right now, if the Republican nominee is going if the Republican nominee, Donald Trump or Ted Cruz or John Kasich perhaps, wins 59-39 among white voters just like Romney did in 2012, then the reality is that they have to win 30% of the vote among Latinos to have a chance. Because the Latino population is still growing. So 59-39, which is Romney made him close in 2012, didn't get even close in 2016 because of the changing demographics of the population. This takes me back to the point. If you're a Republican candidate, there's only two ways to win here. Republican candidate is to boost your percentage of victory over here or to suppress your defeat here. It's the only strategy you've got. Conversely, the Democratic strategy is increase the number. Let's boost here, and let's just try to hold on here. Hold on, right? We'll do the best we can. We're going to lose, but we're not going to lose too bad. So Democrats are focusing over here. Republicans are focusing over here. Republicans are trying to shrink this. Democrats are trying to shrink that. But there's one fundamental difference in how those strategies are playing. Yes, Republicans are trying to shrink this, and Democrats are trying to shrink that, but only one of the parties is engaged in actually trying to suppress. There's a difference between shrinking a margin and suppressing a margin. So, this brings me then to kind of the midpoint of my talk. Responses to the 21st century electorate. What do you do? How do you do? What do you do with these changes that are going on? Well, I built a little continuum that I want to suggest of 5 possible ways in which, if you're a politician or a citizen, you might respond to these changing demographic characteristics. And we're going to have a continuum from one end to another. At this end of the continuum, I'm going to put the possibility that you could embrace these changes. You could say, come here, I want to give you a hug. You increasingly diversify in America, God bless you. All right? And that's what they would say, because they would always say, God bless you, of course. Well, maybe you don't want to say embrace, and maybe embrace is a little too strong, but you want to be somewhere near that, so you'd say, like, I'm going to respect those changes. I'm not going to celebrate them, but I'm going to respect them. And the distinction here might be drawn by thinking about being a Seahawks fan. A Seahawks fan who embraces the Seahawks wears their gear, paints their faces, flies the 12 flag. The Seahawks fan who respects them says, you know, they're a good team. Yeah, they're a solid team. But I'm not wearing Russell Wilson's jersey, okay? So they appreciate respect, but they're not embracing. So this is the continuum as we move across. How do you respond to that increasingly diversifying electorate? You could accept those changes. You neither celebrate them nor fight them, but you say, this is what it is. It is what it is. We'll live with it. You could continue along the continuum. You could critique it. You could say, this is the problem. We have a problem here in Houston, and we need to do something about it. And we can level our critiques and say that our country is going down the wrong road. It's a disaster. It's a problem. Or you could take one more step past critique, and you could attack it. You could literally go at it, and you could say, this will not stand. I will do everything in my power to stop it. In fact, I will do everything possible to encourage others who support me to stop it, including physical or ideological assaults. So this is a continuum from embracing on one end to attack on the other end. And what I want to do is place the Republican and Democratic nominees on this continuum. Okay? So I'm going to start with the Democratic presidential candidates. To start with, I'm going to place Barack Obama over here. I don't have time today, but be happy to talk with you about just when you read his speeches and you look at the things he's got to say, he is absolutely on the embrace end of this continuum, and it outrages many Americans. Okay, so he's here on embrace. And it's partly because of the identity he embodies, but it's also because he's philosophically aligned with this, grew up with it, has embraced it, has made a choice, and then also has won electorally based upon it. So there's reasons for why he's there. So what about our two kind of dominant Democratic candidates? Where do they get placed? And this is always when a room like this gets a little tense, okay? Like where do these folks get placed on here, okay? And so I'm going to place Hillary Clinton roughly, this is just my takes. That's what I study, so there's some basis for putting people here, but there's no scientific kind of manner of doing this. But I would place Hillary Clinton somewhere between embrace and respect. She's not as far along that continuum towards embrace as Barack Obama, but the Clintons and Hillary herself have a long history of kind of coming to African Americans, coming to Latino Americans, and making the case that they're with them and they're together. Bernie Sanders, I'm going to place slightly to the right of Hillary Clinton on this, at about respect. Now, this may or may not be actually where Bernie Sanders is placed in reality, but it is absolutely where he's perceived to be. And this is his fundamental problem right now politically. If Bernie Sanders was right here, and the African Americans, Latino Americans saw him as right here, he would probably be the front runner for the nomination right now. But because that is not the case, Hillary Clinton has absolutely crushed Bernie Sanders across the South and among African Americans by about 85 points in some places. We were in Alabama last week, and she won African Americans 92-6 against Bernie Sanders. Okay, so Sanders is seen as, whether true or not, a Johnny-come-lately to this, and because of that, he has not satisfactorily addressed that in his campaign. And I think at some point just kind of said, that's what it is. It is what it is. I'll do the best I can the rest of the way. And he's run an incredible campaign to achieve what he has, but he doesn't recognize that you cannot win the Democratic nomination without the support of African Americans. You cannot. The Democratic nomination is always decided by African Americans because they are the largest, most consistent Democratic voting bloc in several key states. And that's why Barack Obama beat Hillary Clinton in 2008, because he had their support. So Hillary Clinton is going to win the nomination short of some major scandal because of this gap right here. Whether it's a real gap, I don't know. I don't know what's in Bernie Sanders' heart. All I know is that he didn't make this a point of what he was doing when he was starting to run, and Hillary Clinton has exploited it. She knew right off the bat when she started to invoke Flint, Michigan, what she was doing. Okay? And I don't think she's brazenly cynical about this. I think that she understands that that's the ticket to the White House, and I think she genuinely probably cares. I think Bernie Sanders probably cares too, but all we know is what someone says. And he has not done what she's done to make the case. So because of that, Clinton's going to win the nomination almost certainly. But I want to just leave this slide and move to the Republicans, and I just want you to recognize that these two are still like right here though. They're really close. They're like neighbors, okay? That's the terrain that the progressives and Democrats fight over because we like to argue with someone that we really like 99% agree with. So they're neighbors, okay? But that point of disagreement or distance means something in the Democratic Party or the progressive circles. All right, so let's move on to the Republican candidates. Now, the Republican candidates, their most recent person to victory is George W. Bush, and I would put Bush at respect. Bush is certainly not an embrace, and I would say that he's more than accept. He consistently went out and reached out to Latino Americans. He's spoken with respect towards African Americans when given the chance. He doesn't do a lot, but when he did, he certainly wasn't over here, and I would suggest to you that's almost impossible to be president over here, probably. But the reality is that that's where Bush is. And so that's where I would put Bush. Now, where would I put the current candidates? Well, I would put the current candidates, I would say that the establishment of the Republican Party wanted the current candidates to be here. They wanted them to be here. But there's another body to the Republican Party these days. The Tea Party may want them to be over there. And so the gap here is quite sizable. So you have the establishment wanting a candidate here, and the Tea Party wanting a candidate here. And the Tea Party has been dominating the Republican Party for the last 6 years. So just to give you a sense of the establishment's desire, after the 2012 presidential election, they wrote a post-mortem about the campaign in which they laid out a set of strategies and tactics that needed to be adopted if the party was going to be successful going forward. And in that document, they said this: the Republican Party must, this is the establishment, The Republican Party must focus its efforts to earn new supporters and voters in the following communities: Hispanic, Asian and Pacific Islanders, African Americans, Indian Americans, Native Americans, women, and youth. This priority needs to be a continual effort that affects every facet of our party's activities, including messaging, strategy, outreach, and budgeting. Unless the Republican National Committee gets serious about tackling this problem, we will lose future elections. There's no mincing words in this post-mortem. They call it the autopsy of why Romney lost, what happened, and they said this is front and center. It's point number 2 in the document. Okay? So this is the establishment's position. We need to move towards, we need to be at least in respect towards these diverse communities. Well, the Tea Party's been around since 2010, responding to Barack Obama's election, and they have put forward over the last 6 years a very different conception of what should be done to this increasingly diverse electorate. And we can get some data on that by looking at how many states have passed new voting restrictions since 2010. What states in this country have made it harder to vote since 2010? We know by looking at these laws that they overwhelmingly impact people of color and young people. So what states have made it harder to elect people since 2010? I'll show you a map of the United States, and all the states in red are states that have new laws. – 22 states have passed laws since the Tea Party arrived in 2010 that have made it harder to vote in this country. Voter ID laws, they've made it tougher to vote, fewer early voting days, they've diminished the number of Department of Motor Vehicles that are available to give the kind of IDs that are needed, they've reduced the number of voting places, lots and lots of techniques that overwhelmingly affect younger people and people of color. The Brennan Center, which is named after William J. Brennan, the former Supreme Court Justice, did an analysis of all of this, and this is what they concluded. They said that partisanship played a key role in these new restrictions. Of the 22 states with new restrictions, 18 passed entirely through Republican Party-controlled legislative bodies, and Mississippi's photo ID law passed by a voter referendum. 2 of the remaining 3 states, Illinois and Rhode Island, passed much less severe restrictions in more blue states. According to a recent study from the University of Massachusetts Boston, restrictions were more likely to pass, quote, as the proportion of Republicans in the legislature increased or when a Republican governor was elected. Now, I'm not really that interested in bashing the Republican Party because, to be entirely serious with you, we need a healthy Republican Party in this country. We absolutely need one. But I'm also a social scientist, and I believe in facts, and I believe that there is information, we need to pay attention to it. And this is the factual reality, that the Republican Party has been more vigilant, more determined around this, and they've done it in response to the Tea Party. This is the methodology they've adopted. Restrict the voting. The Brennan Center went on to conclude this. Race was also a significant factor. Of the 11 states with the highest African American turnout in 2008, 7 have new restrictions since 2010. Of the 12 states with the largest Hispanic growth, 2000-2010, 9 of them passed laws making it harder to vote. Social science studies bear this out. The UMass at Boston study shows that states with higher minority turnout were more likely to pass restrictive voting laws. And the University of California study suggests that legislative support for voting ID laws was motivated by racial bias. So these are not randomly located voter restrictions. They are in response to a diversifying political electorate that had the audacity to elect the first black president in this country. So on our trips, our civil rights pilgrimages, we go to the past to understand how and why it occurred in order so we can fight today. These aren't just kind of tours or fun trips. They're trips with a deep responsibility to them. The 1965 Voting Rights Act came after decades-long activism and work. And the reality is it's going away. It's going away. It's going away at the state level, not even worrying about what the Supreme Court's doing. Okay? We are every bit under assault around racialized voter suppression as we were 50 years ago. It is not as widespread, but it is incremental restrictions. So we know that the establishment would like to be over here, and the Tea Party's made very clear that they want an attack on that system, and that's what those states have been doing. So where would I put the candidates that we've seen in this election? Where would I put them? Well, I would say that the establishment has not gotten what they wanted. So these are all the kind of candidates that I would put in the establishment bucket, more or less. Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Chris Christie, John Kasich, Carly Fiorina. I put, on this matter, Rand Paul in that, in terms of voting. He was doing some reasonable outreach to African Americans. You know how well all of these candidates are doing, right? Over here, the Tea Party's got its two candidates in Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. And this is who's winning. Consistently, primary after primary, 60 to 70% of the Republican primaries and caucuses are voting for these candidates. Adding Ben Carson, and the reality is this is the percentage you've got over here, 60 to 70. So this is why we have a civil war in the Republican Party. Because the establishment wants to be over here, the Tea Party's over here, and what the Republican Party is now experiencing is that the chickens have come home to roost. And the Tea Party, which was the way back into power in this country for the Republican Party, has now taken control because they can vote in these primaries away from the establishment. And so we're in the midst of this civil war for the party. Remember that the Democrats, in terms of responding to the increasing electorate, the diverse electorate, they're over here. This is a gap that really is a gap of paradigmatic distinctions. A gap between respect and accept versus attack. And they're not subtle about this. Donald Trump said this morning, what we need is a little bit more of that violence. A little bit more. Okay? We need a little bit more. So, I'm going to end here with this, and then we'll do some Q&A. What we really need, what we profoundly need in this country is some real political leadership. We really need it from Republicans, and I would like the Democrats to step up a little bit stronger too. Okay? When I go to the South with the people that we go with, our interracial, intergenerational, and so on group, the reality is that people have died for us to have these opportunities. They have died, they've had friends die, they've had families die, and I have students right now that are getting arrested and are getting beaten trying to stand up for Black Lives Matter. So this is not an abstract phenomenon. This is a very real Selma is now experience. So let's go back and look when we actually had some political leadership. President John Kennedy in June 1963 gave a speech to this country. On that day, George Wallace had stood in the schoolhouse door in Alabama. Eventually he steps aside, he loses, but he made his stand in the schoolhouse door that day. Kennedy knew that this was going to happen because they'd orchestrated it with Wallace, and so that night they planned for Kennedy to give a speech on civil rights. His very first speech as a president on civil rights. 2.5 years into his presidency, he decides for the first time to publicly give a speech on civil rights. He gives that speech. I want to quote from it in a moment. After he gives that speech in Jackson, Mississippi, Medgar Evers, civil rights leader, is out with a group of people watching the speech. He comes home and he's assassinated outside his home. This is the tenor of this day in American history. Kennedy, in that speech, says, this is not a sexual issue. Difficulties over segregation and discrimination exist in every city, in every state of the Union, producing in many cities a rising tide of discontent that threatens the public safety. Nor is this a partisan issue. In a time of domestic crisis, men of goodwill and generosity should be able to unite regardless of party or politics. This is not even a legal or legislative issue alone. It is better to settle these matters in the courts than on the streets, and new laws are needed at every level, but law alone cannot make men see right. We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities. We face, therefore, a moral crisis as a country and a people. It cannot be met by repressive police action. It cannot be left to increase demonstrations in the streets. It cannot be quieted by token moves or talk. It is a time to act in the Congress, in your state and local legislative body, and above all, in all of our daily lives. It is not enough to pin the blame on others, to say this is a problem of one section of the country or another, or deplore the facts that we face. A great change is at hand, and our task, our obligation, is to make that revolution, that change, peaceful and constructive for all. Those who do nothing are inviting shame as well as violence. Those who act boldly are recognizing right as well as reality. I have read every major presidential speech from Franklin Roosevelt through today. It's part of the research I do. These words right here are some of the most powerful in the presidency. A great change is at hand. And our task, our obligation is to make that revolution, that change, peaceful and constructive for all. Those who do nothing are inviting shame as well as violence. Those who act boldly are recognizing right as well as reality. Now, just to bring this to a very fine point, John F. Kennedy was speaking in Congress, particularly to members of his own party. These were Southern Democrats. He was putting his political capital on the line against them. And he put his re-election on the line. So he lost the South. He was probably not going to get re-elected because that was a Democratic bastion. He put all of that out there and eventually cost his party the South, but because he believed in this and said these things and was willing to take that risk to make that change peaceful and constructive for all. That's political leadership to me. That says this country, this exceptional country, is more important than my political future. Now, I know that we all love Kennedy in this room, so I think it's important for us also to hear some of George Bush's words. George W. Bush in 2011, just after 9/11, on September 17, 6 days later, left. He went to New York to see Ground Zero, and in a staged photo moment, went down the street to the local Islamic Center and met with leaders, and then came out and held a press conference on September 17, 2001. And he said, the face of terror is not the true faith of Islam. That's not what Islam is all about. Islam is peace. America counts millions of Muslims amongst our citizens, and Muslims make an incredibly valuable contribution to our country. Muslims are doctors, lawyers, law professors, members of the military, entrepreneurs, shopkeepers, moms and dads, and they need to be treated with respect. I've been told that some women fear to leave home because by wearing cover, they're afraid they'll be intimidated. That should not and that will not stand in America. Those who feel like they can intimidate our fellow citizens to take out their anger don't represent the best of America. They represent the worst of humankind. And they should be ashamed of that kind of behavior. 3 days later, in his national address to the nation, George Bush took up the topic of Islam again. I also want to speak tonight directly to Muslims throughout the world, he said. We respect your faith. It's practiced freely by many millions of Americans, and by millions more in countries that America counts as friends. Its teachings are good and peaceful, and those who commit evil in the name of Allah blaspheme the name of Allah. By the way, that's the first presidential mention of Allah in the history of the presidency. The terrorists are traitors to, in a speech, the terrorists are traitors to their own faith, trying, in effect, to hijack Islam itself. The enemy of America is not our many Muslim friends. It is not our many Arab friends. Our enemy is a radical network of terrorists and every government that supports them. We are in a fight for our principles, and our first responsibility is to live by them. No one should be singled out for unfair treatment or unkind words because of their ethnic background or religious faith. I would give anything to have a Republican candidate stand up and say this today. You can think whatever you want to think about George Bush and his failed presidency, but on this matter, on this issue, George Bush, like John Kennedy, was speaking to his own party, and he was saying, stand down. That's not who we are. That's not who we are. We are better than that. We today have leading Republican candidates that instead are going the other way. They're saying, let's ban, let's treat, let's be violent. Let's destroy, let's attack. So I take you back then to finish to that Kennedy quote. The question that Sheldon Hackney in 1996 said was, who are we? That is the question, and it's a crucial question. Who we think we are shapes what we do. What I think Kennedy calls us to is to be part of that change. To speak and to not be silent. But to take a stand not only on Lopez with your neighbors, but with anybody in your circle. To not look back on this election and say, where was I? I know right where you were. The reality is you're here right now. What are you going to do when you walk out of here? I'm going back to Seattle because I got work to do with my students, my young people. All right? And I'm asking you to be part of this great change that is at hand. If we're going to be truly an exceptional nation, then we can do this. We have started an initiative called Project Pilgrimage that is around this work. Civil rights trips to the South, civil rights trips around the Northwest. We have a youth pilgrimage that we're building. At the end of tonight, you'll get a chance to make a donation to support this work. We'd love to have your support. It involves an interracial, intergenerational, multi-gender, multi-sexual, economically very multinational group. It is everybody who wants to be part of this. We turn no one away because we're all in this together. Thank you.